하늘로 24시간 밤새도록
The mutual relationship between cinema and architecture is one of the most unprofessed secrets in history. The endless parallel conscience and the awareness of space has long been one of the great medium relationships since the beginning of the 20th century. As both mediums have a special partnership which can be dissected from each end of their spectrums. Architecture defined itself foremost in acting as the visual and physical background of a film narrative. But what certainly is overlooked is how architecture defined itself as one of cinema's effort to produce an end product of an imagination, providing eclecticism in rejuvenating the human sense of space. Architecture carries itself into a role in cinema, characterizing itself in reinterpreting massive civilizations, enriching the existing culture, providing hope of families, and most important of all, framing the human condition. Architecture in cinema history has helped storytelling broaden its horizon in portraying the mental connection between fiction and reality. Through storytelling, architecture has portrayed the most vastly different worlds to the most realistic and confined spaces of our most private perimeters. These achievements in architecture and cinema can be sufficient to explain the most passionate expressions of reality. As every single narrative mostly took place in a three-dimensional space, the relevancy of both fields are impeccable. They constitute a reality without depleting function and imagination. Architecture has always been part of film history, the subject being the science and philosophy of space, providing the complex plane of which characters can contemplate their existence. Therefore, every narrative in film should reflect the dimension it resides, the architectural space. The study has a merit of showing new perspectives toward the two different fields, of which in short may express disconnection and indifference in a brief glance, from the way these two fields are produced and consumed, while cinema as a form of entertainment and arts, and architecture prompts as a single form of science that anchors the human civilization, both occupying the vacant tangible aspects of our human lives that cannot be strayed further away from the human condition. Further expanding the mind and the way we look at both cinema and architecture as something too close to separate from one another, as both mediums have influenced each other through its progression until now, finding new methods to maximize both potentials in their own respective ways, primarily in matters of telling stories and designing from a brief. The exploration of continuity relationship between film and architecture should be studied more explicitly. For a long time, the known proximity of the relation is just the tip of what promises to be more than meets the eye. The two subjects can be studied to broaden our knowledge landscape in perceiving the intricacies of the mediums, accumulating possibilities, then consciously use both studies in their own respective terms, blending the two subjects. Therefore, the study is put in question to address the issues. Why is the continuity between cinema and architecture is so closely related? What are the examples of the continuity? How can the relation between the two subjects can develop? What are the possibilities of potentials both could fulfill? The study will conduct itself through the analysis of the moving pictures, with firstly enriching itself in theories regarding the continuity of architecture and cinema. By selecting the films to study that has a strong presence in architecture, the study will prove exemplary in terms of approaching both subjects with similar manners. Dissecting parts of the film and architecture with existing theories, collecting strong points in the continuity of cinema and architecture using existing theoretical hypotheses through the films of study, conveying a conclusion that ties both subjects in unison through their continuity, respectively. Architecture and cinema both have a great deal of relation in its use of space and how it is consumed and produced. Similarly, the goal is to be conceived through space and perfected through its creation of sequences. According to the Oxford Dictionary, sequence is a set of events, actions which have a particular order. Architecture deals with sequences in contrasting fashion, different but similar in assembling the intended experience. Sequences are addressed by its users in architecture and audiences in cinema, whereas in production, it is overseen by the architect and the director. From the point of view of cinema, since the conception, there has been numerous theories of what constitute a sequence. Sequences in cinema are akin to a set of events and action immortalized through the lens of camera, which primarily can have a particular order or not. The sequences arrange in an order that complements the narrative with preferred focus and style, primarily to translate story and create moods and impressions. These arranged scenes are called sequences, and the arranged scenes are made into films. In the 1910s, Lev Kuleshov conducted an experiment on film editing called the Kuleshov effect. The effect is one of the most important filmmaking theory in history. Through the Kuleshov effect, the filmmaking trade learns that in editing, which is a process of creating sequence, can evoke different understanding and impression within a montage. The montage demonstrated is a mental phenomenon by which viewers or audience can extract more meaning from the interaction from two different sequential frame shots rather than a single one. The theory is best described by Alfred Hitchcock on a 1964 interview with Telescope. He described the method as pure cinema through the assembly of images. He also demonstrated the method on its own terms, using a close-up shot of an old man, juxtaposed with a both little child and an openly dressed woman respectively, then cuts again to the close-up of the old man smiling. These two juxtapositions of the close-up of the old man with the respective subjects evokes a different impression of the old man by the audience.
Now the third way is what one might call pure cinematics, the assembly of film.
One of the other methods of editing and crafting cinema is the method of creating an artificial landscape or creative geography. The editing method is also founded by Lev Kuleshov in order to create a sense of spatial continuity within the sequence, which can mean the film sequence can create a sense of place even though it is shot on different places, thus creating an imaginary space reality within the film, a continuous, uninterrupted space. With these editing techniques, filmmakers are able to manipulate the architecture of the film, thus crossing boundaries of the space constraints in the set of a film. In 1981, Bernard Tschumi published a set of theoretical drawings developed between 1976 to 1981. The Swiss architect argued that the disjunction or the inconsistencies of the architectural space and their use, objects and events, being and meaning, is no accident, proving bits that the designed space, be it the urban space or the private space, is utilized to define the action of occupying user within the space. The transcripts offer a way to read architecture differently, whereas space, movement, and events are independent aspects, yet founded on the same sensibilities of one another, providing new take on the conventional components of architecture. According to Tschumi, there are three classifications of what constitute the transcripts. Events are incidents, occurrences, a particular item in the program. Events can encompass particular uses, singular functions, or isolated activities. They include moments of passion, acts of love, or the instant death. Events have an independent existence on their own. They rarely purely the consequence of their surroundings. Events have their own logic, their own momentum. In film, we see this as scenes. They can have a singular meaning of existence that bears no conjunction to other precedents or future scenes. Then there are spaces. Architectural spaces can have autonomy and logic of their own sometimes, according to the logic of function or culture. Distortions, ruptures, compressions, fragmentations, and juxtapositions are inherent in the manipulation of form. Movement is the action or the process of moving, also a particular act or manner of moving. In a film narrative, progress or incidents, development of a plot or motif, the quality of having plenty of incident. In architecture, such action constituted by entering a building, the present body in space. rushing and violating the balance of established rules in the architectural space. The transcripts are not the accumulation of random events, rather they display a certain organization. One of its primary traits is sequence, that consists of frames portraying space, movement, and event under the structure of its own very set of laws. In architecture, there are three sequences that has connection to one another. First, an internal relation that deals with the method of working, and two external relations that deals with the juxtaposition of the real space towards the program. The first relation is called the transformational sequence, which can be described as a tool or procedure, an internal relation. The second relation is the spatial sequence. Throughout history, constantly, the precedence of the typology are already defined. The variation of it is infinite. The third one is the sequence that bears the utilitarian and social characteristics, the programmatic sequence. These interrelations of sequences form the spectrum of architecture and cinema respectively. They can portray the essential language of what made both fields have a continuity between one another. From the theories that interlink both fields, the variables are much clearer, creating a hierarchy of continuity through their respective sequential theories. However, what defines architecture and cinema to have a great connection are not just from the sequential point of view. The diagram is constructed through the collection of sequential theories, which ties the most of cinema and architecture. The diagram formed a pyramid-like structure, therefore signifying the intensity of the variables in designing the respective fields. The first level, or the basis of the pyramid, are based off the narrative structure in a film, or in architecture a design brief, a commission to design a building. What are the function of the building? Who are the people the building is trying to accommodate? These are considered to be the standard of the abstract, the reason why these crafts came into fruition in the first place. The second level is a setting, the form of physical and mental background in cinema and consideration in topical aspects in designing architecture. Much like cinema, architecture is designed by and for humans, therefore the topical aspects must regard those macro aspects of human life. They serve as a background of the worlds which cinema resides in and where architecture is designed. Typically, there are sub-variables a part of the composition on the setting level. These aspects regard the matter of political, economical, socio-cultural, technological, and environmental. These aspects that make up the variables can be found in both fields in this segment of the pyramid. They dictate and influence to enrich the narrative or adjusting the design towards its tangible context. The third level concerns the motif, or the producer of the field, be it the director of a film or the architect of a building project. This part carries the aspect of decision making from a production standpoint of view. What makes the craft have a motif have to be looked at from both perspectives. So the audience or user came in play. The aspect or motif is when the craft is presented, how the director stayed true to the narrative and setting. Same goes in architecture through plans and drawings. These auteurs determine what truly belongs onto the screen and the site, while the audience and user determines how the material is consumed. The fourth level of the pyramid began entering the realm of sequential similarities through continuity between architecture and cinema. Tying the two narratives of sequential theories, the sequence is comprised of two levels. In films, there are space and editing, actual space regarding where the sequence takes place. In architecture, we see space as the physical embodiment of design, of which burdened upon thousands of work hours and consideration and construction. The spaces of the architecture project are perceived through the user's movement, the being in space, existing within the designed space. While in films, we perceive space through a static medium, unraveling of what now we perceive the space is defined through editing.